Before you click this video, something may already have been happening inside your brain. Before your finger moved, before you consciously thought, I want to watch this, hidden neural activity may have begun preparing that choice. You experience the final moment as a decision. But what if your conscious mind arrived after the process had already started? What if the voice inside your head is not the author of every choice, but the narrator explaining choices your brain has already begun making? That possibility leads to one of the most disturbing questions in science. Are you controlling your brain, or is your brain controlling you? In the early 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet asked volunteers to perform an incredibly simple action. They watched a rapidly moving clock and flexed a finger or wrist whenever they felt the urge. There was no correct moment, no reward, no reason to choose one time over another. They simply acted whenever they wanted. Electrodes recorded activity in their brains, while each person reported the exact moment they first became aware of wanting to move. The volunteers believed their conscious intention came first, followed by the movement. But the recordings suggested something stranger. A slow electrical buildup called the readiness potential began roughly half a second before the action, while the reported conscious urge appeared only around 0.2 of a second before it. Brain activity seemed to begin before conscious intention entered awareness. The finding became famous because it appeared to reverse the order we normally imagine. We think, first I decide, then my brain sends the command, then my body acts. Libet's results suggested another possibility. First, the brain begins preparing, then you become aware of wanting to act, and finally, the movement happens. Suddenly, consciousness looked less like the person starting the engine and more like someone noticing that the engine was already running. But the experiment involved only a tiny, meaningless movement. Choosing when to flex a wrist is not the same as choosing a career, ending a relationship, or deciding what kind of person you want to become. So scientists pushed the question further. Years later, researchers placed volunteers inside brain scanners and gave them another simple choice. Press a button with the left hand or the right hand whenever they wished. The participants also reported when they became consciously aware of their decision. By examining patterns of activity in parts of the frontal and parietal cortex, researchers could predict which button a participant would press several seconds before the participant reported deciding. In some analyses, useful information appeared up to about 10 seconds before awareness, although the predictions were only modestly better than chance, not perfect mind reading. Still, the idea was unsettling. Imagine watching a brain scan while someone sits silently, convinced they have not chosen yet. The computer looks at the activity and quietly predicts left. Seconds later, the person announces, I choose left. To the participant, the choice feels fresh and spontaneous. To the machine, the brain had already revealed a bias toward the answer. But this does not necessarily mean a complete decision was locked in. Predicting slightly better than chance is not the same as proving that the future was unavoidable. The activity might reflect an early tendency, a weak preference, or background noise pushing the brain closer to one option. The person may still have been able to change direction. And then scientists discovered something that made the story even more complicated. For years, many people treated the readiness potential like a hidden command. The brain decides, then consciousness finds out. But another explanation emerged. Imagine countless tiny waves rising and falling inside the brain. Most lead nowhere. But occasionally, random activity builds high enough to cross a threshold and a movement occurs. When researchers average many trials backward from the moment of movement, those random fluctuations can appear as one smooth buildup. In this interpretation, the readiness potential may not be the brain secretly deciding. It may simply show noisy neural activity accumulating until action becomes likely. This matters because the original tasks were deliberately meaningless. Left or right, now or later. There was nothing important to evaluate, so random fluctuations could help determine the outcome. But real decisions are rarely like that. When you choose whether to accept a job, forgive someone, or risk your life for another person, you consider memories, values, emotions, consequences, and goals. Researchers later compared arbitrary choices with meaningful decisions involving donations to nonprofit organizations. The familiar readiness potential appeared before arbitrary choices, but was strikingly absent before the more deliberate decisions. That suggests the neural process behind a meaningless button press may be very different from the process behind choices that actually matter. So did the experiments destroy free will? No. They revealed something more subtle and perhaps more fascinating. Consciousness does not appear to control every step of decision-making. Much of the work happens outside awareness. But unconscious does not mean not you. Your brain is constantly making decisions without asking permission. It adjusts your posture, predicts words, notices danger, recognizes faces, and filters enormous amounts of information before any of it reaches consciousness. When you suddenly feel uneasy around someone, prefer one product over another, or know an answer without knowing why, unconscious systems may have processed clues that your conscious mind never noticed. Your past experiences also shape choices before you consciously examine them. Habits make familiar actions easier. Emotions change what feels safe or rewarding. Advertising links products with feelings. Hunger affects patience. Fear narrows attention. By the time a choice reaches conscious awareness, dozens of invisible influences may already be pulling it in different directions. But here is the mistake: imagining your brain as a separate creature manipulating you. Your unconscious brain is not an enemy hiding behind your conscious mind. It contains your memories, personality, learned values, fears, desires, and biological needs. Saying, "My brain chose it," does not automatically mean, "I did not." You are not a ghost trapped inside a machine. The machine is part of what you are. Conscious thought may still play a crucial role. It can pause an impulse, imagine consequences, form long-term goals, and train future behavior. You may not choose every thought that appears, but you can decide which thoughts to follow. You may not control the first spark of anger, but you can stop yourself from acting on it. You may not consciously design every desire, but you can shape the environment, habits, and principles that influence future choices. So does your brain decide before you do? Sometimes the brain clearly begins preparing actions before you become consciously aware of them. But science has not proven that every meaningful choice is decided in advance, or that free will is simply an illusion. The famous experiments involved small, arbitrary actions. Their predictions were imperfect, and later research suggests deliberate decisions may follow different neural patterns. The truth may be stranger than either side wants to admit. The conscious voice in your head is probably not a king issuing every command. It may be more like one powerful member of an enormous hidden government. Beneath awareness, billions of neurons compare memories, predict outcomes, create urges, and prepare actions. Then consciousness receives only part of the result and calls it my decision. But perhaps freedom does not require a magical mind operating outside the brain. Perhaps freedom is the brain's ability to examine its own impulses, imagine a different future, and change what happens next. Right now, You could continue watching another video. You could close the screen. You could sit completely still, just to prove that you are in control. Whatever you choose, activity inside your brain will come first, because every thought, intention, and decision exists through that brain. The real mystery is not whether your brain makes your choices. The real mystery is why it feels as though there is someone separate inside it, watching everything happen. The story of us begins here.